The sound of gunfire cracking through the morning air sent Preston Xavier scrambling from his bedroll, heart hammering against his ribs as he realized the shots were coming from the direction of the main trail into Pyramid City, Nevada. He had been camped near the Carson River for 3 days now, waiting out a storm that had turned the normally placid waterway into a churning monster of brown water and debris. The year was 1873, and Preston had seen his share of trouble in his 26 years, but something about those shots made his gut twist with an urgency he could not explain. He pulled on his boots, checked his Colt revolver, and mounted his bay gelding in one fluid motion born of years riding the rangeland. The horse picked its way carefully through the muddy ground, ears pricked forward as more shots echoed across the valley. Preston urged him into a faster pace, and within minutes he could see the source of the commotion. A stagecoach had stopped near the swollen riverbank, its driver slumped over in the seat with blood staining his shirt. 2 men on horseback were circling the coach like vultures, firing shots into the air to terrorize whoever remained inside. Preston recognized the type immediately: opportunistic thieves who preyed on travelers caught in bad situations. The bridge that normally spanned this section of river had washed out 2 days ago, and anyone trying to reach Pyramid City from the east had no choice but to attempt a crossing here or travel 50 miles out of their way. Preston did not hesitate. He drew his revolver and fired a warning shot that sent dirt spraying up between the 2 thieves and their prey. "That is far enough," he called out, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Leave the coach be and ride on." The 2 men turned to face him, and Preston could see the calculation in their eyes as they weighed their chances. They were young, maybe early 20s, with the kind of desperate hunger that made men dangerous. For a long moment nobody moved, and the only sound was the roar of the river and the nervous stamping of horses. "This is not your concern, Cowboy," one of them finally said, his hand hovering near his holster. "We saw it first. Whatever is in that coach is ours." "The only thing in that coach is people who need help," Preston replied. "And I am making it my concern. Now you have got a choice to make, and I suggest you make it quick." The tension stretched like a wire pulled too tight, and Preston could feel his muscles coiling, ready to move. He had been in enough standoffs to know that the next few seconds would determine whether this ended peacefully or in bloodshed. His finger rested lightly on the trigger, and he watched both men with the focused intensity of a hawk watching mice. Then the decision was made for them. The stagecoach door flew open, and a woman emerged, holding what looked like a small pistol that was probably more decorative than functional. But the determination in her stance made it clear she would use it anyway. "I am not some helpless prize to be fought over," she announced, her voice cutting through the morning air with surprising authority. "So all of you can settle down before someone gets killed over nothing." The sheer audacity of her appearance seemed to break the spell. The 2 thieves exchanged glances, apparently deciding that a determined woman with a gun, even a small one, combined with an armed cowboy, was more trouble than whatever valuables the coach might contain. They wheeled their horses around and galloped off toward the hills, leaving only dust and the echo of hoofbeats behind them. Preston holstered his revolver and approached the coach slowly, hands visible so the woman would know he meant no harm. Now that he was closer, he could see her properly. She was perhaps 23 or 24 years old, with dark hair that had come loose from its pins and hung in waves around her shoulders. Her dress was well made but travel-stained, and her eyes were the color of amber in sunlight, bright with intelligence and barely suppressed fear. "Are you hurt?" he asked, dismounting and approaching on foot. "I heard the shots from my camp. She lowered the pistol slightly but did not put it away. "I am fine, but our driver is injured. They shot at us when we stopped to assess the river crossing. I think the bullet grazed his shoulder." Her voice was steadier than her hands, which trembled slightly as she gestured toward the man slumped in the driver's seat. Preston moved to check on the driver, a grizzled man in his 50s who was conscious but clearly in pain. The wound was not life-threatening, but it needed attention soon. "We need to get him across the river to Pyramid City, where there is a doctor," Preston said, tearing a strip from his own shirt to make a temporary bandage. "But that water is running too high and fast for a coach. It would be swept away before we made it halfway." The woman climbed down from the coach, her practical boots sinking slightly into the mud. "Then, what do you suggest? We cannot stay here. Those men might come back with reinforcements and Mr. Garrison needs medical attention." Preston studied the river, his mind working through the possibilities. The current was vicious, carrying branches and debris downstream with terrifying speed. But he had crossed rivers like this before, knew the tricks and techniques that could mean the difference between making it safely to the other side and being swept away. His horse was strong and sure-footed, trained for exactly this kind of challenge during his years working cattle drives through difficult terrain. "I can get you across," he said, meeting her eyes directly. "One at a time. My horse can handle the current if we are careful, but it will be dangerous." "The driver first, since he is injured, then you." She studied him for a long moment, and Preston had the distinct impression he was being measured against some internal standard. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded once, decisively. "Mr. Garrison should go first." "I will wait here. But what about the coach and horses?" "Leave them," Preston said. "Once we are all across, I will arrange for someone from town to come back and retrieve them when the water goes down. Right now, staying alive is more important than saving property." They worked together to ease the injured driver down from his perch. Mr. Garrison was barely conscious, mumbling about his responsibility to deliver his passengers safely. Preston got him positioned on the horse, holding him steady while the woman retrieved a rope from the coach's storage compartment. She moved with efficiency and purpose, and Preston found himself impressed by her composure under pressure. "When you worked on a ranch, did you learn to ride?" Preston asked as he secured Mr. Garrison to the saddle. "I grew up on a ranch in California," she replied. "Before my father sold it and moved us to San Francisco, I know horses if that is what you are asking." "Good," Preston said. "Because you are going to need to trust me completely when it is your turn. That river does not forgive mistakes." He led his horse to the water's edge, speaking softly to calm the animal. The gelding had been with him for 4 years and had never let him down, but even the most reliable horse could panic in conditions like these. Preston kept one hand on Mr. Garrison and the other on the reins as he urged the horse forward into the current. The water was shockingly cold when it hit his legs, even through his boots and pants. Within 3 steps, the horse was swimming, powerful muscles working to fight the current that immediately tried to sweep them downstream. Preston kept his weight balanced and his voice steady, talking the horse through each moment. "Easy now, that is it, keep going, almost there." The crossing felt like it took forever, though in reality it was probably less than 5 minutes. The current pulled at them relentlessly, and twice Preston felt his feet swept out from under him, forcing him to cling to the saddle while his horse did most of the work. Mr. Garrison groaned but stayed in place, and finally, mercifully, Preston felt rocks beneath his feet again as they reached the far bank. He got Mr. Garrison onto dry ground and made sure he was stable before turning back to look across the river. The woman was standing exactly where he had left her, watching. Even from this distance he could see the tension in her posture, the way she held herself as though ready to spring into action at any moment. Preston mounted his horse again, giving the tired animal a moment to catch his breath before urging him back into the water. The return crossing was no easier than the first, and by the time he reached the eastern bank again, both he and his horse were exhausted. But there was no time to rest. The woman approached as he dismounted, her amber eyes searching his face. "That looked terrifying," she said quietly. "Are you certain you can do it again?" "I am certain that staying on this side is more dangerous than crossing," Preston replied. "Those thieves will be back, and when they do, they will not be scared off so easily. We need to get you to safety." She nodded, and he saw her take a deep breath, steeling herself. "What is your name?" she asked. "I should at least know the name of the man risking his life to save mine." "Preston Xavier," he said, extending his hand. "Though most people just call me Preston." She took his hand, her grip firm despite the obvious fear she was fighting. "Penelope Thorne. My friends call me Penny. Thank you for coming when you heard the shots. If you had not arrived when you did, I do not know what would have happened." "Well, Penny," Preston said, her name feeling natural on his tongue, "we are going to get you across this river safely, and then you can thank me over a hot meal in Pyramid City. But right now, I need you to listen very carefully to everything I tell you." He explained exactly how the crossing would work, how she would need to hold onto him and let him guide their movements, how important it was not to panic even when the water was over her head. Penny listened intently, asking intelligent questions that showed she understood the danger they were facing. Preston found himself appreciating not just her courage, but her quick mind and the way she focused on practical solutions rather than giving in to fear. When they could delay no longer, Preston helped her mount the horse in front of him, positioning her so she could hold the saddle horn while he kept one arm around her waist. The proximity meant he could feel her breathing, quick and shallow with nervousness, and smell the faint scent of lavender that clung to her hair despite days of travel. "Ready?" he asked, his mouth close to her ear so she could hear him over the river's roar. "No," she admitted, and he felt her body tense. "But let us go anyway." The moment the horse entered the water, Penny gasped at the cold. Preston tightened his arm around her waist, holding her secure as the current hit them. The horse swam strongly, but Preston could feel the animal's exhaustion in every movement. This was the third crossing, and each one had taken its toll. About halfway across, a large branch came rushing toward them on the current. Preston saw it and tried to steer the horse out of its path, but the water was too strong. The branch struck them hard, and suddenly Penny was slipping from his grasp, crying out as the impact loosened her grip on the saddle. Preston reacted on pure instinct, releasing the reins and using both arms to grab her. The horse, well trained even in crisis, continued swimming toward the far bank while Preston held Penny against his chest with every ounce of strength he possessed. The current tumbled them, dunking them both under water for terrifying seconds. Preston kicked hard, fighting to keep their heads above the surface, his lungs burning as he struggled against the river's relentless pull. Then his feet touched bottom, and he was able to stand, staggering through the shallower water with Penny still locked in his arms. His horse had made it to shore and was standing there, sides heaving, looking back at them as if wondering what was taking so long. Preston carried Penny the last few feet to dry land and set her down gently, both of them coughing and gasping for air. Water streamed from their clothes and hair, and Preston could feel his muscles shaking with exhaustion and the aftereffects of adrenaline. But they had made it. They were alive and safe on the western bank of the Carson River. Mr. Garrison was sitting propped against a rock where Preston had left him, looking only marginally more conscious than before. "That was some feat of riding," the old driver managed to say. "Thought for sure that branch had you both." Preston helped Penny sit down on a relatively dry patch of ground, checking her over for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did the branch hit you?" She was still breathing hard, her wet hair plastered to her face, but she shook her head. "I am fine. Scared out of my wits, but fine. You saved my life. That branch would have swept me away if you had not grabbed me." "Then we are even," Preston said, attempting a smile despite his exhaustion. "Because you came out of that coach with a gun when those thieves were threatening." "That was either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both," Penny admitted, and for the first time since he had met her, she smiled. It transformed her face, making her eyes light up in a way that made Preston's already racing heart skip another beat entirely. "I have never been good at sitting quietly while bad things happen around me. My father always said it would get me in trouble one day." Preston found himself smiling back, something warm unfurling in his chest despite the cold water soaking his clothes. "Well, today it worked out. Come on, we need to get you and Mr. Garrison into town before you both catch your deaths of cold. Pyramid City is only about 2 miles from here." The walk to town was slow and exhausting. Preston led his horse, who was too tired to carry passengers anymore, while supporting Mr. Garrison on one side. Penny took the other side of the injured driver, and together they made their way along the muddy road. The sun was climbing higher now, warming them slightly, and Preston was grateful for the heat even as it made steam rise from their wet clothes. Penny talked as they walked, perhaps to distract herself from discomfort, or perhaps because she was the kind of person who processed experiences through conversation. She told him about her journey from San Francisco, how she was traveling to meet her brother who had settled in Virginia City and had a small mining claim there. Mr. Garrison was supposed to deliver her safely, but the storm and washed-out bridge had derailed their plans. "My brother will be worried sick," she said, adjusting her grip on Mr. Garrison as the old man stumbled slightly. "I was supposed to arrive 3 days ago. He is probably imagining all sorts of terrible fates. We will get word to him from Pyramid City," Preston assured her. "The telegraph office can send a message to Virginia City. It is not that far, maybe 30 miles north. He might even be able to come meet you here if he is that concerned." "You know Virginia City?" Penny asked, glancing at him with interest. "I worked a ranch near there for a couple of years," Preston said, "before the owners sold out and I drifted south. Been doing odd jobs, trail work mostly, ever since. I was actually on my way to California when the storm caught me." "California?" Penny's eyebrows rose. "That is where I just came from. What takes you there?" Preston shrugged, aware of how aimless his life had been recently. "I heard there was work on some of the big ranches in the Sacramento Valley. I have got experience with cattle and horses, and I figured it was as good a place as any to see if I could find something steady." They fell into a companionable silence after that, and Preston found himself acutely aware of Penny's presence beside him. She was not like most women he had met in his travels. There was a strength and self-possession about her that had nothing to do with the pistol she had been carrying and everything to do with the way she met challenges head-on without complaint. Even now, wet and exhausted and helping support an injured man, she moved with determination rather than defeat. Pyramid City appeared on the horizon like a small miracle. Its wooden buildings clustered along the road, with the kind of haphazard arrangement common to mining towns that had grown quickly and without much planning. It was not a large settlement, maybe 200 people at most, but it had the essential services Preston was looking for: a doctor, a hotel, and a telegraph office. Several people came out to meet them when they saw the bedraggled group approaching. Preston recognized a few faces from his previous visits to the area. A woman named Mrs. Sullivan, who ran the boarding house, immediately took charge of Mr. Garrison, calling for someone to fetch the doctor. The town's blacksmith, a huge man named Thomas, offered to look after Preston's exhausted horse, and a young boy was dispatched to the telegraph office to send word to Penny's brother in Virginia City. Through all the commotion, Preston stayed close to Penny, making sure she was taken care of. Mrs. Sullivan insisted she come to the boarding house immediately for dry clothes and a hot bath, and Preston walked with them, his own wet clothes starting to chafe uncomfortably as they dried in the sun. At the door to the boarding house, Penny turned to face him, and Preston was struck again by how beautiful she was, even travel-worn and bedraggled. "I do not know how to properly thank you," she said softly. "You risked your life for strangers. That is not something I will forget." "You do not need to thank me," Preston replied. "Any decent person would have done the same." "No," Penny said firmly. "Not everyone would have. Most people would have stayed in their camp and ignored the trouble. You chose differently. That means something." Mrs. Sullivan cleared her throat politely from the doorway. "Miss Thorne, we really should get you out of those wet things before you catch pneumonia. Mr. Xavier, you are welcome to the washroom around back if you would like to clean up. I will have some hot coffee ready when you are done." Preston nodded his thanks and watched as Penny was ushered inside. He felt strangely reluctant to let her out of his sight, which was foolish given that they had only met a few hours ago. But something about their shared ordeal had created a connection he could not quite name, a sense that their meeting had been more than simple chance. He made his way around to the back of the boarding house, where Mrs. Sullivan kept a small washroom for travelers. The water was cold but clean, and Preston scrubbed away the river mud and sweat, changing into his spare clothes from his saddlebags. His body ached in a dozen places, and he knew he would be sore tomorrow, but it was the good kind of ache that came from honest effort and a job well done. When he returned to the front of the boarding house, he found the doctor had already examined Mr. Garrison and was reporting to a small crowd that had gathered. "He will be fine," the doctor was saying. "The bullet did not hit anything vital, just scraped along the shoulder. He needs rest and to keep the wound clean, but he should recover fully." Preston felt relief wash over him at the news. He had seen enough men die from infected wounds to know that even minor injuries could turn deadly without proper care. He accepted a cup of coffee from Mrs. Sullivan and sat on the boarding house porch, feeling the afternoon sun warm his bones. Penny emerged about an hour later, transformed by clean clothes and dry hair. She wore a simple dress of dark blue that brought out the amber color of her eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a neat arrangement that made her face look younger somehow. When she saw Preston still sitting on the porch, her face lit up with pleasure. "You waited," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," Preston admitted, "and to hear what the doctor said about Mr. Garrison." "He is sleeping now," Penny reported. "Mrs. Sullivan says he can stay here while he recovers, and she will make sure he is looked after. The telegraph to my brother has been sent, so hopefully he will receive word soon that I am safe." She paused, then added more quietly, "Thanks to you." Preston felt heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with the coffee or the sun. "I am just glad we all made it across in one piece. That was closer than I would have liked when that branch hit us." "I have never been so terrified in my life," Penny confessed. "When I started slipping, I was certain I was going to drown. But you held on. Even when it would have been easier and safer to let go and save yourself, you held on." Their eyes met, and Preston felt something shift in the air between them, a recognition that went deeper than gratitude or relief. He saw his own awareness reflected in Penny's expression, the sense that something significant had begun during those desperate moments in the river. "Are you hungry?" he asked, needing to break the intensity of the moment before he said something foolish. Mrs. Sullivan mentioned that the hotel dining room serves decent food. "I am starving," Penny admitted with a laugh. "I have not eaten anything substantial since yesterday morning. The coach was supposed to stop for lunch in Dayton, but then the bridge was out and everything went wrong." They walked together to the hotel, which was only a few buildings down the main street. Pyramid City was quiet in the afternoon heat, with most people seeking shade or rest until the temperature became more bearable. The hotel dining room was nearly empty, and they took a table near the window where they could watch the street. Over plates of beef stew and fresh bread, they talked. Preston found himself telling Penny about his childhood in Missouri, how his parents had died of fever when he was 15, leaving him to make his own way in the world. He had drifted west, working ranches and cattle drives, learning the skills that kept him employed but never quite finding a place that felt like home. Penny, in turn, told him about growing up on her family's ranch in California, about her mother who had died giving birth to her younger brother Matthew. Her father had tried to keep the ranch going but eventually sold it and moved the family to San Francisco, where he worked as a clerk and slowly drank himself to death. Matthew had left for Nevada as soon as he was old enough, determined to make his fortune in the silver mines. "He writes to me regularly," Penny said, tracing patterns in a small puddle of spilled water on the table. "Says he is doing well, that the claim is starting to produce. I am hoping he is telling the truth and not just trying to keep me from worrying. Matthew always was an optimist." "What will you do when you reach Virginia City?" Preston asked. "Will you stay with your brother, for a while at least?" Penny said. "I have been working as a seamstress in San Francisco, and I am hoping to set up a similar business in Virginia City. Mining towns always need good seamstresses. Too many men trying to make their fortunes and not enough people providing basic services." She smiled slightly. "Plus, I want to keep an eye on Matthew, make sure he is taking care of himself." Preston nodded, understanding the impulse. Family is important. "You are a good sister to travel all this way alone." "Well, I was not supposed to be alone," Penny pointed out. "Mr. Garrison was hired specifically to make sure I arrived safely, though I suppose neither of us anticipated quite so much adventure along the way." They continued talking as the afternoon stretched into evening, and Preston found himself reluctant to end the conversation. Penny was intelligent and funny, with sharp observations about the world that made him see things differently. She had opinions on everything from mining rights to women's suffrage, and she was not afraid to express them even when they might be considered controversial. When they finally left the hotel, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Preston walked Penny back to the boarding house, their steps slow, both seemingly reluctant for the day to end. At the door, Penny turned to face him, her expression serious. "My brother should arrive tomorrow or the day after, assuming he got the telegram and can leave his claim. But I wanted to say, before there is no chance to say it properly, that I am grateful for what you did today. You are a good man, Preston Xavier." "You are a remarkable woman, Penelope Thorne," Preston replied, meaning every word. "Any man would be lucky to know you." Something flickered in Penny's eyes, an emotion Preston could not quite name. Then she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, a brief touch that sent warmth spreading through his chest. "Good night, Preston," she said softly. "I hope I see you again before I leave for Virginia City." Preston touched the spot where her lips had brushed his skin, feeling suddenly like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "I will be around," he managed to say. "I need to arrange for someone to retrieve that stagecoach once the river goes down. And my horse needs at least a day or two of rest before he is ready to travel again." "Good," Penny said, smiling. "Then I will see you tomorrow." Preston walked back to his camp on the outskirts of town in a daze, his mind replaying every moment of the day. He had met Penny only that morning, but it felt like he had known her much longer. The connection between them was undeniable, and the thought of her leaving for Virginia City in a few days left him feeling strangely hollow. He lay in his bedroll that night, staring up at the stars and thinking about amber eyes, and a voice that spoke with authority and kindness in equal measure. Somewhere along the way, between pulling her from a raging river and sharing stories over beef stew, Preston had started to fall for Penelope Thorne. The realization should have frightened him, but instead it felt right, like puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. The next morning, Preston was up early, checking on his horse and making arrangements with the local livery to organize the stagecoach retrieval. The owner, a practical man named Mr. Henderson, agreed to handle it for a reasonable fee, and Preston paid him half upfront with the rest to be settled when the job was done. His tasks complete by mid-morning, Preston found himself drawn back to the boarding house. Mrs. Sullivan was sweeping the porch when he arrived, and she gave him a knowing smile. "Miss Thorne is helping me in the kitchen," she said without preamble. "Said she could not stand sitting around doing nothing while she waited for her brother. You are welcome to join us for lunch if you would like." Preston accepted gratefully and found Penny in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up and flour dusting her arms as she kneaded bread dough. She looked up when he entered, and her whole face brightened in a way that made Preston's heart do strange things in his chest. "Preston, Mrs. Sullivan said you were making arrangements about the stagecoach. Is everything settled? All taken care of?" Preston confirmed, leaning against the doorframe and watching her work. "Mr. Henderson from the livery is going to handle it. Should have it retrieved and the horses recovered within the next few days, depending on how fast the water goes down." "That is good news," Penny said, punching down the dough with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Garrison will be relieved." He was worrying about it this morning, kept trying to get out of bed until Mrs. Sullivan threatened to tie him down. They worked together through the lunch preparations, and Preston found himself enjoying the domestic simplicity of it. He carved roast chicken while Penny arranged vegetables, and they moved around each other in the small kitchen with surprising ease, as if they had been doing this for years rather than just met yesterday. Over lunch, with Mr. Garrison joining them at the table and looking much improved from the previous day, conversation turned to the future. "I sent word to the stagecoach company about what happened," Mr. Garrison said, his shoulder properly bandaged and his color much better. "They are sending a replacement driver and coach from Carson City. Should be here in about 3 days. Miss Thorne, you will be able to continue your journey then if you still want to travel by stage." "That depends on whether my brother gets here first," Penny said. "If Matthew arrives before the new coach, I will travel with him. Otherwise, I will wait for the stage." She glanced at Preston. "What about you? You said you were heading to California. Will you leave soon?" Preston found himself hesitating, reluctant to commit to departure when it would mean leaving Penny behind. "My horse still needs rest," he said, which was true enough even if it was not the whole reason for his reluctance to leave. "I figured I would stay a few more days, maybe pick up some work around town to earn some money before I move on." The livery was looking for someone to help with the stagecoach retrieval, Mr. Henderson mentioned. Said he could use an extra set of hands, especially someone who knows his way around horses and difficult crossings. Might be work there if you are interested." Preston nodded, grateful for the suggestion. It gave him a legitimate reason to stay in Pyramid City, without seeming like he was lingering just to spend more time with Penny. Though from the knowing look Mrs. Sullivan gave him, he suspected she saw right through the excuse. The afternoon passed pleasantly. Preston did indeed check in with the livery, and was hired on the spot to help with the stage coach retrieval. The work would not start until the water level dropped, but Mr. Henderson advanced him a small amount to secure his help, which meant Preston had enough money for a proper room at the boarding house rather than sleeping rough at his camp. He moved his belongings in that evening, and Mrs. Sullivan gave him a room down the hall from where Penny was staying. It was simple but clean, with a real bed and a window that looked out over the main street. After months of sleeping on the ground or in bunkhouses, it felt like luxury. Dinner that evening was a communal affair with all of Mrs. Sullivan's boarders gathered around her large dining table. Besides Preston, Penny, and Mr. Garrison, there was a traveling salesman heading to California, a young couple who ran the general store, and an older woman who was Mrs. Sullivan's sister visiting from Carson City. The conversation was lively, and Preston enjoyed watching Penny hold her own in discussions that ranged from politics to the best way to preserve vegetables for winter. After dinner, Preston and Penny walked together in the evening air, strolling along the quiet street as the town settled down for the night. The earlier awkwardness between them had faded, replaced by a comfortable ease that felt both new and familiar at the same time. "I keep thinking about yesterday," Penny said quietly, her hands folded in front of her as they walked. "About how different things could have turned out if you had not heard those shots, if you had decided it was not your business and stayed at your camp." "But I did hear them and I did come," Preston said. "You cannot torture yourself with what-ifs. It will drive you mad." "I know," Penny agreed. "But it makes me wonder about fate, about whether some things are meant to happen. I do not usually believe in such things. I am too practical for that. But meeting you the way we met, it feels like more than just chance." Preston stopped walking and turned to face her. The street was empty, and the only light came from the windows of nearby buildings and the stars overhead. "I have been thinking the same thing," he admitted. "I have drifted from place to place for years, never feeling like I belonged anywhere. But talking with you, being near you, it feels different. It feels like something I did not know I was looking for." Penny looked up at him, her amber eyes reflecting the starlight. "I am supposed to go to Virginia City," she said softly, "to be with my brother and start fresh there." "I know," Preston said, though the words felt like stones in his chest. "But I do not want to say goodbye to you," Penny continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is that foolish? We have known each other for barely 2 days." Preston reached out and took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin against his. "If it is foolish, then I am a fool too. Because the thought of you leaving, of never seeing you again, it makes me feel like I am about to lose something important before I even had a chance to understand what it is." They stood there in the quiet street, hands clasped, both aware they were at a crossroads. The sensible thing would be to acknowledge the connection between them, but accept that their paths were leading in different directions. Preston was going to California, and Penny was going to Virginia City to be with her brother. They had their own lives, their own plans. But standing there with her hand in his, Preston found he did not want to be sensible. He wanted to be reckless, to follow this feeling wherever it led. "Come with me to Virginia City," Penny said suddenly, the words tumbling out as if she had been holding them back and could not contain them anymore. "I know that is forward of me, and we barely know each other, but I cannot stand the thought of never seeing you again. Come with me. There is work there for a man with your skills, probably better work than you will find drifting from ranch to ranch. And we would have time to see if this, whatever this is between us, is real. Preston felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Every practical instinct he had told him this was crazy, that you did not change your whole life for a woman you met 2 days ago. But another part of him, a deeper part, knew that opportunities like this did not come along often. The connection he felt with Penny was rare and precious, and walking away from it would be the real mistake. "Yes," he heard himself say. "Yes, I will come with you to Virginia City." The smile that broke across Penny's face was worth any risk. She squeezed his hand tightly, and Preston found himself smiling back, feeling lighter than he had in years. "Really? You mean it?" "I mean it," Preston confirmed. "California will still be there if Virginia City does not work out. But I would regret it for the rest of my life if I did not take this chance to see where this leads." Penny laughed, a sound of pure joy, and impulsively threw her arms around him in a hug. Preston held her, breathing in the scent of lavender and feeling the rightness of having her in his arms. When she pulled back, there were happy tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for taking a chance on something uncertain. That takes courage." "You are worth the risk," Preston said simply, and meant it with every fiber of his being. They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, and Preston felt like the world had shifted into sharper focus. He had a direction now, a purpose beyond simply drifting from job to job. Whatever happened next, he would be facing it with Penny by his side. The next 2 days passed in a pleasant blur. Preston continued working for Mr. Henderson, helping prepare for the stagecoach retrieval. The water was finally starting to recede, and they made plans to attempt the crossing in another day or two. In the evenings, Preston and Penny spent every possible moment together, taking walks, sharing meals, and talking about everything and nothing. Mr. Garrison recovered quickly, his natural toughness and Mrs. Sullivan's good care combining to get him back on his feet faster than the doctor had expected. He was pleased to hear that Preston would be traveling with Penny to Virginia City, saying it eased his mind to know she would not be traveling alone. On the 3rd day after their meeting, a rider arrived from Virginia City. He was a young man with sun-weathered skin and excited eyes, and the moment Penny saw him, she cried out with joy. "Matthew!" She ran to her brother and hugged him fiercely. Matthew Thorne was tall and lean, about 20 years old, with the same dark hair and intelligent eyes as his sister. When they finally separated, he was grinning widely. "Penny, when I got your telegram, I nearly died of worry. I rode straight through to get here. Are you all right?" The message said something about trouble at the river. Penny quickly filled her brother in on everything that had happened, from the thieves to the dangerous river crossing. Matthew's expression grew darker as she described the attack, but when she reached the part about Preston's rescue, he turned to Preston with obvious gratitude. "You saved my sister's life," Matthew said, extending his hand for a firm shake. "I cannot thank you enough. If anything had happened to her, I do not know what I would have done." "Your sister is braver than she gives herself credit for," Preston replied. "She held her own during all of it." "That sounds like Penny," Matthew agreed with obvious affection. "She never did know how to back down from trouble." He turned back to his sister. "I brought the wagon. We can head back to Virginia City whenever you are ready. I have got a small house there now, nothing fancy, but it has 2 bedrooms and should be comfortable enough until you get settled." "Actually," Penny said, glancing at Preston with a smile that made his heart skip, "Preston is coming with us. He is looking for work in Virginia City." Matthew's eyebrows rose, and Preston saw the protective brother evaluating him carefully. "Is that so? What kind of work?" "Anything that needs doing," Preston said honestly. I have experience with horses, cattle, some mining work, general ranch labor. I was heading to California, but your sister convinced me that Virginia City might have better opportunities." Matthew's expression remained neutral, but Preston could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. "Virginia City can always use good workers," he said finally, "especially men who know horses. The mines use a lot of mules and horses for hauling, and there is never enough people who know how to handle them properly." He paused, then added, "But I am guessing your interest in Virginia City has more to do with my sister than employment opportunities." Preston met his gaze steadily. "I would not be honest if I said otherwise, but I promise you my intentions toward Penny are honorable. I know we have not known each other long, but what I feel for her is real." For a long moment, Matthew studied him, then his stern expression cracked into a grin. "Good. Penny deserves someone who will stand up and be honest about his feelings. Too many men play games. I respect directness." He clapped Preston on the shoulder. "You can ride in the wagon with us. We will get you situated in Virginia City and see about finding you work." The relief Preston felt was overwhelming. He had not realized how much he had been worried about Matthew's approval until he received it. Penny caught his eye and smiled, clearly pleased that her brother and the man she was falling for were getting along. They spent another day in Pyramid City, making preparations for the journey. Preston helped with the stage-coach retrieval, which went smoothly now that the water had receded to manageable levels. Mr. Garrison's stage-coach and team were recovered intact, and the old driver was able to see his horses again, before the replacement coach arrived from Carson City. On the morning they were set to leave, Mr. Garrison pulled Preston aside for a private word. "I wanted to thank you again, son," the old driver said, "and to tell you something. I have been driving stages for 30 years and I have seen a lot of things. I know how to read people. That young lady cares for you deeply, and I can see you feel the same. Do not take that lightly. Real connection between people is rare. Hold on to it." "I intend to," Preston assured him. "Thank you, Mr. Garrison, for the advice and for getting Penny safely across most of Nevada before things went wrong." "Just doing my job," Mr. Garrison replied with a gruff smile. "Though I admit, it turned out more exciting than I had planned." Mrs. Sullivan also had a private word with Preston as he was loading his saddlebags into Matthew's wagon. "You take care of that girl," she said firmly. "She is special. I could see that the moment I met her. And you seem like a good man, but remember that actions speak louder than words. Be the man she deserves." "I will do my best," Preston promised, touched by the older woman's concern. The journey to Virginia City took most of a day. Matthew's wagon was sturdy and well-maintained, pulled by 2 strong horses that made good time on the rough roads. Preston rode his bay gelding alongside the wagon, and Penny sat in the back where she could talk to both him and her brother as they traveled. Matthew told them about Virginia City, about how the silver strikes had transformed it from a collection of tents to a booming city almost overnight. "There are maybe 15,000 people there now," he said. "Maybe more. New people arrive every day hoping to strike it rich. The truth is, most of them will not. The big companies have bought up most of the good claims, but there is still opportunity for people willing to work hard at other things." "What about your claim?" Penny asked. "Is it producing like you said in your letters?" "It is doing all right," Matthew admitted. "Not going to make me a millionaire, but I am pulling out enough silver to make a decent living, better than I was doing trying to find work in San Francisco anyway." He glanced at Preston. "I could use another hand at the claim if you are interested. The work is hard, but the pay is fair." "I am interested in any honest work," Preston replied, "though I should tell you upfront my experience with mining is limited. I know the basics, but I am better with horses than with a pickaxe." "I can teach you what you need to know," Matthew said. "And honestly, having someone who knows horses would be useful. There is a mare I have been thinking about buying to help haul ore, but I do not know enough to judge whether she is worth the price. If you could look at her for me, I would appreciate it." They fell into easy conversation, and Preston found himself liking Matthew more and more. Penny's brother was straightforward and hardworking, with a dry sense of humor that occasionally caught Preston off guard and made him laugh. It was clear that Matthew cared deeply for his sister, and Preston respected the way he had come immediately when he heard she was in trouble. As the sun began to set, they crested a hill and Virginia City came into view. It was larger than Preston had expected, sprawling across the hillside in a chaotic tangle of buildings that ranged from elegant hotels to rough mining shacks. Smoke rose from countless chimneys, and even from a distance, Preston could hear the sounds of industry, the thump of stamp mills crushing ore, the shouts of workers, the general noise of a city that never really slept. "Home, sweet home," Matthew announced. "It is not much to look at, but it grows on you." They made their way through the crowded streets as darkness fell. Virginia City was a study in contrasts, with grand opera houses standing next to rough saloons, and wealthy mine owners in fine suits passing miners still covered in rock dust from their shifts. Preston stayed close to the wagon, protective instincts kicking in as he saw the rough characters eyeing Penny with interest. Matthew's house was on the edge of town, a small but well-built structure with 2 bedrooms, a main room that served as kitchen and living area, and a tiny room that Matthew had set up as an office. It was modest but clean, and Penny immediately began making plans for how to arrange things. "Preston, you can take my room for now," Matthew said. "I will sleep in the office until we figure out better arrangements." "I cannot take your room," Preston protested. "You can and you will," Matthew said firmly. "It is the least I can do for the man who saved my sister's life. Besides, I am not home much anyway. I spend most nights at the mine. There is a small cabin there where I sleep when I am working late." They settled in, and Penny cooked dinner using supplies Matthew had stocked before leaving for Pyramid City. It was simple fare, but it tasted like a feast after days of travel. As they ate, Matthew outlined his plans for the coming days. "Tomorrow I will take you both to the claim and show you how things work," he said to Preston. "If you think you can handle the work, we will talk about wages and arrangements. And Penny, I already put the word out that you are coming and that you are a seamstress. I have got at least 3 people who want to meet with you about work." 3 people already," Penny said, surprised and pleased. "Matthew, how long have you been planning this?" "Since you told me you were thinking about leaving San Francisco," Matthew admitted with a grin. "I figured if I could show you there was opportunity here, you would be more likely to come." Preston watched the siblings banter, feeling a warmth in his chest at being included in their circle. This was what family felt like, he realized. Not the family you were born into, but the family you chose. And somehow, in the span of less than a week, Penny and Matthew had become his family. That night, lying in Matthew's bed and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Virginia City through the window, Preston thought about how dramatically his life had changed. A week ago, he had been drifting aimlessly, heading to California with no clear purpose beyond finding work. Now he was in Nevada, planning to work a silver claim with a man he had just met, all because he had fallen for a woman with amber eyes and a spirit that matched his own. It should have felt reckless. It should have felt like a mistake. But instead, it felt like the first truly right decision he had made in years. The next morning, Matthew took them to his claim. It was located about a mile outside of town, tucked into a hillside that showed clear signs of excavation. The mine itself was not large, but it was well organized, with proper timber supports and a decent ore cart system for hauling out the rock. "This is not one of the big bonanza mines," Matthew explained as he showed them around, "but there is a good vein of silver-bearing ore running through here. I work it mostly by myself, though I hire day labor sometimes when I need to move a lot of rock." He handed Preston a pickaxe and spent the morning teaching him the basics of hard rock mining. It was back-breaking work, swinging the pickaxe to break loose chunks of ore-bearing rock, then loading it into carts to be taken to the surface. Preston had done hard physical labor all his life, but mining used muscles he did not know he had. By noon, he was exhausted and sore. "You did well," Matthew said, clearly impressed. "Better than most men do their first time. The work gets easier as you build up the right muscles. Or it just hurts in new and interesting ways," Preston joked, stretching his aching back. Matthew laughed. "That too. Come on, let us break for lunch." Penny brought food. They ate outside the mine entrance, and Penny examined the ore samples Matthew had collected. "How do you know which rock has silver and which is just rock?" she asked. "Experience, mostly," Matthew said, "and a lot of trial and error. You learn to spot the signs, the way the rock looks and feels. Then you take samples to the assay office and they tell you how much silver is actually in there. It is not an exact science, which is why so many people go broke chasing veins that peter out to nothing. But yours has not petered out." Preston asked. "Not yet," Matthew said. "The vein seems to go pretty deep. I am hoping I've got years of work here if I manage it right and do not get too greedy." They spent the afternoon working together, and Preston began to get a feel for the rhythm of mining. It was hard work, but there was something satisfying about it, about pulling wealth literally from the earth through pure physical effort. He could see why men were drawn to it, despite the dangers and difficulties. As they were preparing to head back to town, a group of 3 men approached the claim. They were well-dressed but hard-looking, with the kind of casual violence that came from being used to getting their way. The leader, a tall man with a thick mustache, stopped a few feet from Matthew and looked around with obvious appraisal. "This is the Thorne claim?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "It is," Matthew replied, his whole posture becoming guarded. "Can I help you with something?" "Maybe," the man said. "My name is Richard Anderson. I represent the Consolidated Mining Company. We have been buying up claims in this area, consolidating operations. We would like to make you an offer for your claim." "I am not interested in selling," Matthew said flatly. Anderson smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You have not heard the offer yet. We are prepared to be quite generous." "I do not care how generous the offer is," Matthew replied. "This claim is mine and I am working it myself. I am not interested in selling to a big company that will just absorb it into some massive operation." Anderson's smile faded. "That is disappointing to hear. Consolidated is acquiring most of the independent claims in this area. It would be better for everyone if you cooperated." Preston felt his muscles tense at the implied threat. He moved slightly, positioning himself where he could react quickly if these men tried anything. Penny had gone very still, watching the confrontation with worried eyes. "I said I am not interested," Matthew repeated, his voice hard. "Now I would appreciate it if you would leave my claim." Anderson studied Matthew for a long moment, then his gaze shifted to Preston. "You are new around here. You work for Thorne." "I am his partner," Preston said, the lie coming easily because it was really not much of a lie at all. "And he has already given you his answer. Time for you to move along." Something dangerous flickered in Anderson's eyes, but he apparently decided that this was not the time or place to push the issue. "All right," he said, stepping back. "We will go, but think about our offer, Thorne. Running an independent claim is getting harder all the time. Accidents happen. Equipment fails. It would be a shame if something went wrong simply because you were too stubborn to accept help." With that thinly veiled threat hanging in the air, Anderson and his men left. Preston watched them until they were out of sight, his hand resting on the grip of his revolver. "That was not good," Matthew said quietly. "Consolidated has been pressuring independent miners for months. Most have sold out. The ones who have not, well, some have had bad luck. Tunnels collapsing, equipment sabotaged, that sort of thing." "Do you think they would actually try to hurt you to get your claim?" Penny asked, her voice tight with worry. "I do not know," Matthew admitted, "but I am not selling. This claim is my future, maybe the only real chance I have got to build something lasting. I am not giving it up because some company thinks they can bully me into selling." Preston respected Matthew's determination, but he also understood the reality of the situation. Big mining companies had resources and connections that independent miners could not match. If Consolidated wanted Matthew's claim badly enough, they would find ways to make his life difficult. "Then we need to be careful," Preston said. "Watch for trouble and make sure someone is always at the claim. If they are going to try something, we need to be ready." Matthew nodded gratefully. "Having you here helps. I have been worried about leaving the claim unattended, worried about Penny being in town alone. Now at least there are 3 of us to watch out for each other." They headed back to Virginia City as the sun set, all of them more subdued than they had been that morning. Preston kept watch on the trail, alert for any sign that Anderson's men might be following them, but they made it back to the house without incident. That evening, after dinner, Penny and Preston sat on the small porch while Matthew worked on his accounts inside. The night was cool and clear, and the sounds of Virginia City drifted up to them, a constant reminder that this was a very different place from the quiet ranch lands Preston was used to. "Are you sorry you came?" Penny asked quietly. "This is not exactly the peaceful new start you were probably hoping for." Preston reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I am not sorry at all. Yes, there are complications, but that is life. What matters is that I am here with you. Everything else, we will figure out as we go." Penny squeezed his hand. "I was so worried when those men showed up today. The way they threatened Matthew, the way they looked at you like they were sizing up an opponent. I do not want anything to happen to either of you." "We will be careful," Preston assured her. "Your brother is smart and tough, and I have dealt with men like Anderson before. Bullies usually back down if you stand up to them, and if they do not, well, we will handle that too." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Penny said, "I spoke with one of the women Matthew mentioned, the one who needs a seamstress. She wants me to make alterations on several dresses and possibly some new clothes for her daughters. It is not much, but it is a start." "That is wonderful," Preston said warmly. "See, you are already building your business here." "I am trying," Penny said. "I want to prove to Matthew that coming here was the right decision, and I want to prove to myself that I can make my own way, build something of my own." She paused, then added more softly, "And I want to build a life here that includes you." Preston felt his heart swell at her words. He turned to face her, using his free hand to gently cup her cheek. "Penny, I need you to know something. What I feel for you, it is not just attraction or convenience because we happen to meet at the right time. You are special. You are strong and kind and brave, and being with you makes me want to be better than I have been. I know we have not known each other long, but I am serious about this." "About us?" Penny's eyes shimmered with emotion. "I feel the same way. When you pulled me from that river, it was like you saved more than just my life. You gave me hope that maybe I did not have to face everything alone anymore. That maybe I had found someone who would stand beside me, not in front of me or behind me, but right beside me." Preston leaned forward and kissed her, a gentle press of lips that nevertheless sent warmth flooding through his entire body. Penny kissed him back, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, and Preston felt like all the wandering years of his life had been leading to this moment, to this woman. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing harder, and Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Penelope Thorne," he whispered. "I know it is too soon to say it, that I probably should wait longer, but I do. I love you." "I love you too," Penny whispered back, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. "I love you, Preston Xavier, and I do not care if it is too soon. Some things you just know." They held each other on that small porch while Virginia City bustled around them, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and were determined to build a future together, despite whatever challenges lay ahead. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Preston worked with Matthew at the claim during the days, learning the ins and outs of mining and helping to extract the silver-bearing ore. It was hard, often dangerous work, but Preston found satisfaction in it. Matthew was a good teacher and a fair partner, and they worked well together. Penny threw herself into establishing her seamstress business. Word spread quickly that there was a skilled seamstress in town, and soon she had more work than she could handle. She took over the main room of the house during the days, setting up her sewing area near the window where the light was best. Preston loved coming home to find her working, her face focused in concentration, as her needle flew through fabric. They heard nothing more from Richard Anderson or the Consolidated Mining Company, though Matthew remained cautious. He varied his routine, never leaving the claim at predictable times, and made sure someone was always watching when they were working. Preston respected his caution and followed his lead. In the evenings, the three of them would share dinner and talk about their days. Preston and Penny's relationship deepened with each passing day, moving beyond the initial rush of attraction into something more solid and lasting. They took walks together when time allowed, explored Virginia City, and talked about their dreams for the future. One evening, about a month after Preston's arrival in Virginia City, Matthew cleared his throat during dinner in a way that suggested he had something important to say. "I have been thinking," he began, looking between Preston and Penny. "The claim is doing well enough that I think we can afford to build a small addition onto the house. Another bedroom, maybe a larger kitchen. The place is getting pretty cramped with three of us here." "Matthew, that is not necessary," Penny protested. "We are managing fine." "We are managing, but we could do better," Matthew said. "And besides, I have been thinking that maybe the expansion should be more permanent. Preston, you and I have been working the claim together for a month now, and you have more than proven yourself. I would like to make you an official partner if you are interested. Equal share in the profits, equal say in decisions." Preston was stunned. "Matthew, I cannot ask you to do that. This claim is yours. You found it, you developed it. And I am not going to be able to keep working it alone forever," Matthew replied. "Having you as a partner makes practical sense. But more than that, you have become family. You love my sister, and unless I am badly mistaken, you two are going to get married eventually. So we might as well make it official now. What do you say?" Preston looked at Penny, who was smiling through happy tears, and then back at Matthew. "I say yes. Thank you, Matthew. I will not let you down." They shook hands, sealing the partnership, and Penny hugged them both. "This calls for a celebration," she declared, pulling out a bottle of whiskey Matthew had been saving for a special occasion. As they toasted to new beginnings, Preston felt a contentment he had never experienced before. He had a home, a purpose, a partner in Matthew, and most importantly, the love of an extraordinary woman. Life in Virginia City was not easy, but it was real and meaningful in ways his drifting existence had never been. The happiness of that evening made what happened 3 days later all the more shocking. Preston and Matthew were working deep in the mine, following a particularly promising vein of ore when they heard a commotion outside. Exchanging worried glances, they grabbed their tools and hurried to the surface. Richard Anderson was there, along with a sheriff's deputy Preston had not seen before and 2 more of Anderson's men. Anderson was holding official-looking papers, and his expression was one of smug satisfaction. "Matthew Thorne," the deputy said, his voice bored as if he had done this many times before. "I am here to serve you with a notice of claim dispute. The Consolidated Mining Company is asserting that your claim overlaps with their holdings and that you are trespassing on company property." "That is nonsense," Matthew said, anger making his voice sharp. "I filed proper claims on this land. Everything is legal and documented. According to these papers, there is a discrepancy in the boundary markers," Anderson said smoothly. "The company has conducted a proper survey, and it turns out your eastern boundary is actually 30 feet further west than you thought, which means you have been mining company property." "Let me see those papers," Preston demanded, stepping forward. He had learned enough about mining claims in the past month to know the basics of how boundaries worked. The deputy handed over the documents, and Preston scanned them quickly. They looked official, complete with survey notes and legal descriptions, but something felt wrong about the whole thing. The timing was too convenient, coming right after Matthew had refused to sell. "These papers claim the survey was done 2 weeks ago," Preston said. "But I have been working this claim every day for the past month, and I never saw any surveyors up here." "The survey was conducted during hours when the claim was unoccupied," Anderson said. "Everything was done legally and properly. Now, you need to cease operations immediately and vacate the disputed area until the matter is resolved in court." "And how long will that take?" Matthew asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Could be months," the deputy said with a shrug. "Court dockets are backed up. In the meantime, you cannot work the eastern section of your claim." Preston realized immediately what this meant. The eastern section was where the richest vein ran, the part of the claim that made it profitable. Without access to that area, Matthew would be left with marginal ore at best. He could not make a living that way, and eventually he would be forced to sell just to survive. "This is theft," Preston said flatly, looking directly at Anderson. "You are using legal manipulation to steal what you could not buy." Anderson's smile was cold. "We are following the law. If you have a problem with the survey results, you can challenge them in court. But until then, you need to comply with this notice." Matthew looked like he wanted to argue, but the presence of the deputy made it clear that fighting would only lead to arrest. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "We will comply with the notice, but this is not over. I will fight this." "You do that," Anderson said, clearly not worried. "Good luck finding a lawyer who will take on Consolidated. Most of the good ones in Virginia City are already on retainer with us." They left, and Preston and Matthew stood outside the mine, both furious and frustrated. Preston wanted to chase after Anderson and settle this the way he would have settled disputes in his younger, wilder days, but he knew that would only make things worse. "What are we going to do?" Preston asked. "There has to be a way to fight this." "I do not know," Matthew admitted, running his hands through his hair in agitation. "Maybe I can find a lawyer in Carson City or Reno who is not under Consolidated's thumb. But that takes money, and if I cannot work the good part of my claim, I do not have much money coming in." They trudged back to the house, and when Penny saw their faces, she immediately knew something was wrong. They explained the situation, and her reaction was immediate anger. "They cannot do this," she said fiercely. "There has to be someone who can help. What about going to the newspaper? Exposing what Consolidated is doing?" "The newspaper is partly owned by investors who also have stakes in Consolidated," Matthew said wearily. "I already looked into that when they first approached me. The company has its fingers in everything in this town." For the first time since Preston had met him, Matthew looked defeated. The weight of fighting a much larger, better-funded opponent was clearly taking its toll. Preston felt helpless, wanting to fix this but not knowing how. That night, as Preston and Penny lay together in the darkness of their room, whispering so Matthew would not hear, they talked about options. "Maybe we should leave," Penny said quietly. "Go somewhere Consolidated does not have influence. Start fresh." "Is that what you want?" Preston asked, though the thought of running away sat poorly with him. "No," Penny admitted. "I want to stay and fight. But I do not want to watch my brother lose everything he has worked for, and I do not want to see you get hurt if this turns violent." Preston pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair. "We are not going to run. Your brother stood up to those men when it would have been easier to sell out. We owe it to him to stand with him now. There has to be a way to fight this that does not involve violence or giving up." "But what?" Penny asked, frustration clear in her voice. Preston did not have an answer, but he knew they would figure something out. They had to. The answer came from an unexpected source 2 days later. Preston was in town buying supplies when he was approached by an older man he had seen around but never spoken to. The man was perhaps 60 years old, well-dressed, but with the weathered look of someone who had spent years in mining camps. "You are Preston Xavier, Matthew Thorne's partner," the man said without preamble. "I am Henry Sullivan. I used to own 3 claims that Consolidated wanted. They pulled similar tricks on me, manipulated boundaries, and tied me up in legal disputes until I had to sell just to eat. I have been watching what they are doing to your partner. If you are here to tell me we should give up, save your breath," Preston said, not bothering to hide his bitterness. "On the contrary," Henry said, "I am here to help. I should have fought harder when they came after me, but I was alone and tired. You and Matthew are young and have energy to spare. More importantly, you have something I did not." "What is that?" Preston asked, suddenly interested. "Proof that Consolidated is falsifying surveys," Henry said, keeping his voice low. "I have been collecting evidence for months, talking to other miners who were forced out, comparing survey documents. There are discrepancies, patterns that suggest the surveys are being manipulated. But I need someone with an active claim dispute to go public with this, someone willing to fight." Preston felt hope kindle in his chest. "Matthew will fight. We both will. What do we need to do?" Henry explained his plan. He had been in contact with a lawyer in Carson City, who specialized in mining law and who had no ties to Consolidated. If they could provide enough evidence of survey manipulation, they could potentially file a complaint not just with the local courts, but with the territorial government. It would be a long fight, but it was a fight they could actually win. Preston and Henry went immediately to find Matthew, who was working on paperwork at the house. When they explained the situation, Matthew's defeated expression transformed into determination. "Tell me what you need," he said to Henry. "Whatever it takes." Over the next 3 weeks, they worked tirelessly to build their case. Henry provided his collected evidence, and Matthew went through his own claim documents with a fine-toothed comb, looking for discrepancies. Preston talked to other independent miners, many of whom had stories similar to Matthew's. Penny helped by organizing all the documentation, creating a system that would make it easy to present their evidence. During this time, Preston and Matthew also had to figure out how to keep making a living. They worked the western section of the claim, which was less productive but still provided some income. Preston also took odd jobs around town, using his skills with horses to earn extra money. It was exhausting, working from dawn until long after dark most days, but they had no choice. Through it all, Preston's relationship with Penny continued to deepen. She was his refuge and strength, the person he turned to when the stress became overwhelming. They supported each other through the difficulties, and Preston found himself more certain with each passing day that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with this woman. Finally, after weeks of preparation, they had enough evidence to present to the lawyer in Carson City. Matthew, Preston, and Henry made the trip together, carrying carefully organized documents that represented weeks of work and the testimonies of more than a dozen miners who had been forced out by similar tactics. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Foster, reviewed their evidence with obvious interest. "This is good work," she said after several hours of review. "If even half of this holds up under scrutiny, you have got a strong case not just for challenging the boundary dispute, but for proving a pattern of fraudulent behavior by Consolidated. That could lead to criminal charges, not just civil remedies." "How long will this take?" Matthew asked. "I am running out of money, and every week I cannot work the main part of my claim puts me deeper in debt." "It will not be quick," Margaret admitted, "but I can file for an emergency injunction that would allow you to continue working your claim while the case is being investigated. That should happen within a week or two. The full case will take months, maybe longer, but you have got a real chance here." They returned to Virginia City with renewed hope. Margaret Foster filed the injunction the next day, and true to her word, within 10 days, a territorial judge issued an order allowing Matthew to resume full operations on his claim while the boundary dispute was investigated. It was not a final victory, but it was a reprieve. The relief on Matthew's face when he received the news was profound. "I did not think we could actually win," he admitted that evening over a celebratory dinner. "I thought we were just going to fight as long as we could before eventually losing everything." "We have not won yet," Preston cautioned, "but we are fighting, and that is what matters." Penny raised her glass. "To not giving up even when the odds are against you, and to the people who stand together when it matters most." They clinked glasses, and Preston felt a surge of pride in these people who had become his family. They were fighters, all of them, and they were doing it together. The next several months were intense. They worked the claim aggressively, pulling out as much ore as they could while the injunction protected them. Matthew and Preston developed a rhythm, becoming an efficient team underground. The mine expanded, and with it, their profits. For the first time since the dispute began, they were making good money. Penny's business also flourished. She had become the go-to seamstress in Virginia City, with a waiting list of clients. She hired a young woman to help her keep up with demand, and together they turned the main room of the house into a proper workshop. The addition to the house was completed, giving them more space and privacy. Preston and Penny now had their own room, properly furnished, and it felt like a real home rather than temporary shelter. Through all of this, the legal case ground forward. Margaret Foster proved to be worth every penny they paid her, doggedly pursuing evidence and building a case that grew stronger by the week. The territorial investigator she had gotten involved began finding discrepancies in multiple surveys conducted by the company Consolidated used, lending credence to their claims of systematic fraud. Then one evening, 8 months after the boundary dispute began, Margaret Foster arrived at the house with news. The territorial attorney has decided to pursue criminal charges against the surveying company and several executives at Consolidated Mining, she announced. They are offering a settlement on your claim dispute. Consolidated will acknowledge your original boundaries, pay you damages for lost income during the dispute, and cover your legal fees. In exchange, you agree not to pursue civil charges against them personally. Matthew looked at Preston, who nodded. They had discussed this possibility. "We accept," Matthew said. "We never wanted to destroy the company, we just wanted them to leave us alone and stop stealing from independent miners." "There is one more thing," Margaret said, a smile playing at her lips. "The territorial government is implementing new regulations for mining claim surveys and boundary disputes. Independent verification will be required, and there will be penalties for companies that use legal manipulation to force out competitors. What you did here, standing up and fighting, it is going to change things for miners all across Nevada." After Margaret left, the three of them sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then Penny started laughing, a sound of pure joy and relief, and Preston and Matthew joined in. They had done it. They had actually won. "I could not have done this without you," Matthew said, looking at Preston with genuine gratitude. "Either of you. Penny, you kept us organized and sane. Preston, you stood with me when you had no obligation to, when it would have been easier to walk away. I will never forget that. We are family," Preston said simply. "That is what family does." That night, after Matthew had gone to bed, Preston asked Penny to take a walk with him. She agreed, curious about his serious expression. He led her to a small hill overlooking Virginia City, where they could see the lights of the town spread out below them. "Penny," Preston began, taking both her hands in his, "when I pulled you out of that river 9 months ago, I had no idea my life was about to change completely. I was drifting, going nowhere in particular, with no real purpose or direction. But you changed everything. You gave me a reason to stay in one place, to build something lasting, to be more than just a wanderer." Penny's eyes were bright with emotion in the starlight. "Preston, let me finish," he said gently. "I know we have not known each other a full year yet. I know there are people who would say it is too soon. But I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Penelope Thorne. I want to spend every day for the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" He pulled a simple gold band from his pocket, a ring he had bought weeks ago and had been carrying around, waiting for the right moment. It was not fancy, but it was real gold, purchased with money he had earned through honest work. Tears streamed down Penny's face, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you, Preston Xavier. I love you so much." Preston slipped the ring onto her finger, and then they were kissing, holding each other as the city lights sparkled below them. It was not the grand, romantic gesture of storybooks, but it was real and perfect and theirs. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony in Virginia City. Matthew stood up as Preston's best man, and the young woman who worked with Penny in her seamstress business served as maid of honor. Henry Sullivan attended, along with Margaret Foster, who had become a friend during the legal battle. Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan from Pyramid City made the journey to attend, having kept in touch with Penny through letters. The ceremony was held in the small church on the edge of town, and Penny wore a dress she had made herself, simple but beautiful. Preston wore his best suit, which Penny had altered to fit him perfectly. When they exchanged vows, promising to stand by each other through whatever life brought, Preston felt a sense of completeness he had never known was possible. The reception was held at the house, which they had decorated with flowers and bunting. The whole mining community turned out to celebrate, grateful to the couple who had stood up to consolidate it and won. There was food and music, and Preston danced with his new wife until his feet hurt and his face ached from smiling. Matthew gave a toast that made both Preston and Penny cry. "My sister has always been the bravest person I know," he said, raising his glass. "When our mother died and our father fell apart, Penny held us together. When we lost the ranch and had to start over in San Francisco, Penny adapted and thrived. And when she decided to come to Nevada to be with me, she showed once again that she never backs down from a challenge. Preston, you are getting an extraordinary woman, and I could not be happier that you are joining our family officially. To Preston and Penny, to Preston and Penny." The crowd echoed, and glasses clinked all around. Later, as the celebration was winding down, Preston and Penny stood together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Nevada sky in shades of orange and gold. Penny leaned against Preston's shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her, feeling utterly content. "We did it," Penny said softly. "We built something here, a home, a life, a future." "We did," Preston agreed, "and this is just the beginning." Over the next several years, Preston and Penny built a life that exceeded anything either had imagined. The mine continued to produce well, and Preston and Matthew became respected members of the Virginia City business community. They hired additional help, including 2 young miners who reminded Preston of himself when he was younger, and they treated their employees fairly, paying good wages and maintaining safe working conditions. Penny's seamstress business grew until she had 3 women working for her full time. She became known not just for her skill with a needle, but for her fair dealing and her willingness to hire and train other women who needed work. Her shop became a gathering place for women in Virginia City, a place where they could talk freely and support one another. Preston found that he had a talent for managing the business side of the mine. He handled the ore sales, negotiated with the stamp mills, and made sure they were getting fair prices for their silver. Combined with Matthew's mining expertise, they made an excellent team. 2 years after their wedding, Penny gave birth to their first child, a son they named Peter. Preston had never imagined himself as a father, but holding his son for the first time, he felt a love so fierce it took his breath away. He vowed to be the kind of father he had never had, present and supportive and always there when needed. Matthew, meanwhile, had met a woman named Sarah who worked as a teacher in Virginia City. She was smart and kind, with a quiet strength that complemented Matthew's more outgoing nature. They were married a year after Preston and Penny, and Sarah moved into the house, which they expanded once again to accommodate the growing family. When Peter was 3 years old, Penny gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Paul and Patricia. The house was chaos with 3 young children, but it was joyful chaos, filled with laughter and love. Preston would sometimes think back to that morning by the Carson River, to the sound of gunfire that had changed his life. If he had stayed in his camp, if he had decided it was not his concern, his life would have been completely different. He would probably still be drifting, working temporary jobs, never putting down roots. Instead, he had helped a woman cross a raging river, and on the other side, she had spoken words that changed everything. Not just her initial thanks, but every word since. Words of love and encouragement, of partnership and shared dreams. 5 years after their wedding, Preston and Penny were sitting on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. Peter was chasing the twins, all 3 of them shrieking with laughter. Inside, Matthew and Sarah were preparing dinner, and the smell of cooking food drifted through the open windows. "You ever miss California?" Penny asked. "You were heading there when we met. Sometimes I wonder if you gave up on a dream to stay here with me." Preston took her hand, noting the calluses from years of sewing mixed with the softness that remained. California was never a dream, he said honestly. It was just a destination, something to move toward because I did not know what else to do. You gave me an actual dream, Penny. A home, a family, a purpose. I have never regretted staying, not for a single moment. Penny smiled and squeezed his hand. I was so scared that day by the river. Scared of those men, scared of the water, scared of what was going to happen to Mr. Garrison and me. But then you appeared, and somehow I knew everything was going to be all right. Not because you were going to fix everything, but because I could see in your eyes that you were someone who stood up when it mattered. Someone who did not walk away from trouble. You were pretty brave yourself, Preston reminded her. Coming out of that coach with your little pistol ready to fight, I think that was the moment I started falling in love with you, even if I did not know it yet. Really? Penny asked, turning to look at him with surprise. That quickly? Maybe not the full realization, Preston admitted. But something changed in that moment. I saw your courage, your determination to face trouble head-on rather than just hoping someone else would handle it. That was when I knew you were special. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play. Peter had caught the twins and was tickling them until they could barely breathe from laughing. It was a scene of pure domestic happiness, the kind Preston had never thought would be his. Matthew came out onto the porch, wiping his hands on a towel. Dinner is almost ready. Sarah says 5 more minutes. He settled into a chair and watched his nieces and nephew with an expression of contentment. You two ever think about how crazy our lives were 5 years ago? Fighting consolidated, not knowing if we were going to lose everything? Sometimes, Preston said. Usually when I need to remind myself how good we have it now. We were lucky, Matthew said. Lucky that you heard those shots that morning, lucky that you were brave enough to help, lucky that Margaret Foster was willing to take our case. A lot of things could have gone differently. It was not all luck, Penny said firmly. We worked hard. We stood together. We did not give up when things got difficult. That counts for something. You are right, Matthew agreed. Sarah is always telling me I do not give us enough credit for our own efforts. I just know how close we came to losing everything, and it makes me grateful for what we have now. Sarah called from inside that dinner was ready, and they gathered the children and went inside. The evening was filled with the pleasant chaos of family dinner, with children needing help cutting their food, milk getting spilled, and conversations overlapping until it was hard to follow any single thread. After dinner, Preston helped put the children to bed while Penny cleaned up the kitchen with Sarah's help. It was their routine, the rhythm of family life that had become as natural as breathing. Preston read Peter a story while Penny nursed the twins to sleep, and by the time the house finally quieted down, both of them were exhausted. In their bedroom, Penny changed into her nightgown while Preston removed his boots. I have been thinking, Penny said as she brushed out her long hair. The mine is doing well and my business is successful. We have money saved. Maybe it is time to think about buying property, building our own house. This place is getting crowded with Matthew and Sarah and the children. Preston had been thinking the same thing. I saw some land for sale just outside town, near where the claim is. Good property with water access. We could build something substantial, a real house with room for the children to grow. Let us look at it this week, Penny said, climbing into bed beside him. I would like to have our own place, somewhere that is just ours. I love Matthew and Sarah, but I want space for our family. I will take you to see it, Preston promised, pulling her close. And if you like it, we will start making plans. They did look at the property, and Penny loved it immediately. It was 10 acres with a small stream running through it, flat enough to build on but with gentle hills that would be perfect for children to explore. They bought it within a week and began planning their house. The building took most of a year, with Preston and Matthew doing much of the work themselves with help from friends and hired laborers. They built a sturdy 2-story house with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a parlor where Penny could continue her seamstress work. There was a barn for horses and a chicken coop, and a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the house. When they finally moved in, Preston carried Penny over the threshold while the children ran excitedly through the rooms, exploring their new home. It was one of the proudest moments of Preston's life, knowing that he had built this with his own hands, a home for his family that would last for generations. Life settled into a new pattern. Preston and Matthew continued working the mine, which remained profitable. The criminal charges against Consolidated's executives had led to reforms that made it easier for independent miners to operate, and the Virginia City mining community thrived as a result. Penny's seamstress business eventually became too much to manage from home, and she opened a proper shop in town with her 3 employees. It was successful enough that she was able to hire 2 more women and began teaching sewing classes for young girls who wanted to learn a trade. The children grew. Peter became a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and wanted to be a lawyer like Margaret Foster when he grew up. Paul was more adventurous, always getting into trouble but with a good heart that made it hard to stay angry with him. Patricia was quiet but determined, with her mother's intelligence and her father's stubborn refusal to quit when things got difficult. When Peter was 7 and the twins were 5, Penny discovered she was pregnant again. This time it was a single child, another daughter they named Priscilla. Preston held his youngest daughter and marveled at how full his life had become. A decade ago, he had been alone, drifting, with no real connections to anyone or anywhere. Now he had a wife he adored, 4 children, a brother in Matthew, a sister in Sarah, and a home he had built with his own hands. The years continued to pass, each one adding its own memories and milestones. The mine remained productive, though they knew the silver would not last forever. Preston and Matthew began diversifying, investing in other businesses around Virginia City, including a livery stable that Preston managed in partnership with the original owner. Preston's skills with horses, which had saved Penny's life that day at the river, became the foundation of another successful business. He trained horses for the mines, for wealthy residents who wanted riding horses, and for the occasional cattle operation in the area. It was satisfying work that complemented the mining and gave them additional security. Matthew and Sarah had 3 children of their own, and the cousins grew up together, more like siblings than extended family. Family dinners became large, boisterous affairs with children of all ages running around while the adults tried to have conversations that inevitably got interrupted. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston arranged for Matthew and Sarah to watch the children so he could take Penny on a trip. They traveled to Carson City and stayed in a nice hotel, a luxury they rarely indulged in with 4 young children at home. It felt like a second honeymoon, a chance to reconnect as a couple rather than just as partners in parenting and business. On their last evening in Carson City, they walked along the river, and Preston found himself thinking about another river, a different time when everything had been uncertain and new. "What are you thinking about?" Penny asked, recognizing his thoughtful expression. "The Carson River," Preston said. "How it tried to kill us 10 years ago, and now here we are, walking alongside it peacefully. Seems like there should be some kind of lesson in that. That dangerous things become safe with time," Penny suggested. "Or that nothing stays dangerous forever if you survive it," Preston said. "We survived the river, survived the fight with Consolidated, survived all the challenges of building a life together, and each thing we survived made us stronger. Penny leaned her head against his shoulder. Do you remember what I said to you after you pulled me from the water, after we made it across? Preston thought back. So much had happened in those first days that some details were blurry. You thanked me, called me brave. I did, Penny agreed. But I also said you were a good man, and I remember you looked uncomfortable, like you did not think you deserved the compliment. But you were a good man, Preston. You still are. You are the best man I know. Preston felt emotion tighten his throat. I try to be worthy of you and the children. That is all I can do. You are worthy, Penny said firmly. You are more than worthy, and I am grateful every day that you heard those shots, that you decided to help, that you chose to stay with me instead of continuing on to California. My life is better in every way because you are in it. They kissed there by the river, and Preston felt the same electricity he had felt that first time, 10 years ago when they were new to each other. The passion had not faded with familiarity. It had only deepened, becoming something richer and more profound than simple attraction. When they returned to Virginia City and their children, Preston felt renewed. The daily grind of work and parenting was deeply satisfying, but it was good to step away occasionally and remember why they worked so hard, what they were building together. The children continued to grow and thrive. Peter went away to school in San Francisco when he was 16, determined to become a lawyer. Preston and Penny missed him terribly, but they were proud of his ambition and determination. Paul discovered a talent for mining and began working the claim with his Uncle Matthew and father during school breaks. Patricia showed an aptitude for sewing and business, working in her mother's shop and proving to have an even better head for numbers than Penny. And little Priscilla, the baby, turned out to have her father's way with horses and spent every free moment at the livery. Matthew and Preston eventually sold the mine to a larger company for a substantial sum, having extracted most of the accessible silver. They were both in their 40s by then, with enough money invested in various businesses that they did not need to do hard physical labor anymore. But neither of them was the type to sit idle, so they focused on their other enterprises and on being present for their growing families. Preston's life had become rich beyond anything he could have imagined that morning when he heard gunfire by the Carson River. He had love, family, prosperity, and respect in the community. But more than any of those things, he had purpose. Every day he woke up knowing why he was working, what he was building, and for whom. When Preston was 50 years old, Peter returned to Virginia City with his law degree and his new bride, a smart young woman from San Francisco named Anne. Peter opened a law practice in town, and within a few years, he had built a reputation for honest dealing and standing up for the small operator against larger interests. Preston saw echoes of their fight against Consolidated in Peter's work, and he was proud of the man his son had become. Paul eventually took over management of the mining investments, proving to have a good eye for which claims were likely to be profitable. Patricia opened her own shop, expanding on what her mother had built, and Priscilla surprised everyone by starting a horse breeding operation that became quite successful. Matthew's children also found their own paths, and the extended family remained close, gathering for dinners and holidays, supporting each other through life's inevitable challenges and celebrations. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Preston and Penny's children threw them a celebration dinner. The house was filled with family and friends, and person after person stood to toast the couple and share stories about how Preston and Penny had influenced their lives. When it was Matthew's turn to speak, he stood with his glass raised and his eyes bright with emotion. 25 years ago, my sister came west to be with me, and we both thought that would be the extent of our adventure. But then a cowboy heard gunfire and decided to help strangers in trouble, and everything changed. Preston, you saved my sister's life that day, but you did more than that. You became my brother, my partner, my friend. You stood with me when times were hard and celebrated with me when times were good. This family, this life we have all built together, it started with your decision to help rather than turn away. So here is to Preston and Penny, to 25 years of marriage, and to the next 25. May they be as blessed as the first. Everyone raised their glasses and drank, and Preston pulled Penny close, kissing her despite the good-natured catcalls from their children and grandchildren. Yes, they had grandchildren now, 3 from Peter, 2 from Paul, and 1 from Patricia. The family tree continued to grow and branch. That night, lying in bed in the house they had built together, Preston and Penny talked quietly about the past and the future. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if we had never met?" Penny asked. "Where you would be now if you had not stopped to help that day?" "Sometimes," Preston admitted. "I would probably still be drifting, working temporary jobs, maybe drinking too much like a lot of lonely men do. Or maybe I would have settled somewhere eventually, found someone else, built some kind of life. But it would not have been this life. It would not have been you. I think I would have survived without you," Penny said thoughtfully. "I would have made it to Virginia City eventually, would have built my business, would have lived. But I would not have thrived the way I have with you beside me. You gave me the courage to dream bigger than I would have alone." "We gave each other that," Preston said. "That is what partnership means. We make each other better." They fell asleep holding hands, the way they had countless nights over the past 25 years, and Preston felt a deep contentment that came from a life well lived with the right person. Preston was 55 years old when he had a health scare that reminded him of mortality. A pain in his chest sent Penny into a panic, and the doctor was summoned immediately. It turned out to be nothing serious, just strained muscles from moving heavy equipment at the livery. But it made both Preston and Penny confront the reality that they would not live forever. "We need to make sure everything is in order," Penny said that evening, her voice still shaky from the scare. "The businesses, the property, everything should be clearly documented so the children know what to do." "We will take care of it," Preston assured her. "Peter can help us with the legal aspects, but Penny, I am fine. I am not going anywhere anytime soon." "You do not know that," Penny said, tears spilling over. "None of us know that. And I am not ready to lose you. I will never be ready to lose you." Preston held her while she cried, understanding that this was about more than just his chest pain. They were getting older, had already started losing friends to illness and accident. The children were grown with families of their own. This phase of life came with its own sorrows and fears. "I love you," he said quietly. "And I plan to be around to annoy you for many more years. But you are right, we should make sure everything is organized, not because something is going to happen soon, but because it is the responsible thing to do." They spent the next several months working with Peter to organize their affairs, making sure all their property and businesses were properly documented and that their wishes were clearly stated. It was sobering work, but it also gave them peace of mind. Life continued. Preston and Penny grew older together, watching their children's children grow and begin having children of their own. The family they had created continued to expand, and Virginia City remained their home even as the mining industry slowly declined and the town's character changed. Preston was 68 years old when Matthew died suddenly of a heart attack while working in his garden. The loss hit Preston hard. Matthew had been more than a brother-in-law. He had been Preston's best friend, his partner in building a life in Nevada, the brother he had never had by blood, but had chosen through love and loyalty. At Matthew's funeral, Preston stood to speak and found himself struggling with emotion. "Matthew Thorne gave me a chance when he had no reason to," Preston finally said. "He welcomed me into his family, made me his partner, stood beside me through challenges that would have broken lesser men. I owe him more than I can say. He was a good man, a loyal friend, and I will miss him every day for the rest of my life." Sarah lived for another 5 years after Matthew's death, and when she passed, she was buried beside her husband. Preston and Penny made sure the graves were well tended, visiting regularly to leave flowers and to tell Matthew and Sarah about what was happening with the family they had helped build. Preston was 73 when he realized that he was getting truly old. His joints ached in the morning, he moved more slowly than he used to, and his hearing was not what it once was. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Penny had not diminished a single bit. Penny was 70, still beautiful in Preston's eyes despite the silver in her hair and the wrinkles earned through a lifetime of smiling and laughing. She moved with less energy than she once had, but she was still sharp-witted and engaged with life. They spent most of their time now at home, surrounded by visiting children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling stories about the past and watching the younger generations build their own lives. One evening, sitting on their porch and watching the sunset paint the Nevada sky in familiar colors, Penny took Preston's hand. "You remember the river?" she asked, a question she had asked many times over the years. "I will never forget it," Preston replied, which was always his answer. "That was the day my real life began." "Mine too," Penny agreed. "Everything before that was just preparation for everything that came after. The life we built, the family we created, all of it started with you deciding to help. And you deciding to trust me," Preston added. "You could have refused to cross with me. You could have waited for someone else or tried another way, but you trusted me with your life." "I saw something in you," Penny said. "Even scared and exhausted and not knowing if we would make it across safely, I looked at you and I saw someone I could trust. I have never regretted that decision. Not once in all these years." Preston squeezed her hand gently. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set and the first stars appeared. This was what a life well lived looked like, Preston thought. Not perfect, not without pain or loss or challenge, but full. Full of love and family and purpose. Full of moments exactly like this one, simple and perfect and precious. Preston was 78 years old when he died peacefully in his sleep, Penny beside him as she had been for nearly 50 years. The funeral was enormous, with what seemed like half of Virginia City turning out to pay their respects to a man who had lived with honor and integrity, who had stood up when it mattered and had built something lasting. Penny spoke at the funeral, her voice steady despite her grief. "Preston Xavier was the best man I have ever known," she said to the assembled crowd. "He saved my life when we first met, but that was just the beginning. Every day we were together, he saved me again by being exactly who he was, honest, loyal, brave, and endlessly kind. He was a good husband, a good father, a good friend. The world is poorer without him, but it is richer for having had him in it. I loved him for 50 years, and I will love him for however many years I have left." Penny lived for 3 more years after Preston's death, years spent surrounded by family and sharing stories about the man she had loved. When she died at 73, she was buried beside Preston in the cemetery overlooking Virginia City, a place where they could rest together for eternity. Their children made sure the gravestone told their story in simple words. Preston Xavier and Penelope Thorne Xavier, he helped her cross a raging river. On the other side, she spoke words of wonder. Together they built a life of love. 1873, 1951. The family they had created continued to grow and thrive for generations. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried forward the values Preston and Penny had lived by: courage, loyalty, honesty, and love. The businesses they had built continued to prosper, adapted by each new generation to meet changing times. The house Preston had built with his own hands remained in the family, carefully maintained and cherished as a reminder of where they had come from. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, descendants of Preston and Penny would sit on that same porch and watch the Nevada sunset, and someone would tell the story of how it all began. About a cowboy who heard gunfire and decided to help. About a woman brave enough to trust a stranger with her life. About a raging river crossed against impossible odds. About love found in the most unlikely circumstances and nurtured into something that lasted lifetimes. The story always ended the same way, with words that had become family legend. On the other side of the river, she looked at him with wonder in her eyes and thanked him for saving her life. Neither of them knew it yet, but in that moment, they saved each other. And from that salvation came a love that built a dynasty. It was a good story. It was a true story. And it was a story that reminded every generation that courage and love, combined with determination and loyalty, could overcome any obstacle and build something beautiful that would last forever. The end.